It's time for the Bleed Los Podcast with your hosts, Alonso and Juan, Alicia Del Valle, and the babyface gimmick in the sky, Roger.
BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your basketball wagering needs, including pro and college hoops throughout the year. With up-to-the-minute odds, stats, and trends, you can follow your favorite team's path to the playoffs with in-game live betting, contests, and all the best player props. Experience the world's best wagering platform anytime from your desktop or your mobile devices. Head to BetOnline today to become part of the team, and remember to use promo code BELIEVE for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here.
And welcome to another episode of the Bleed Los Podcast. Different bit of a setup this time. You know, we don't got the original crew, but we got the Dodgersbeat writers themselves. Obviously, I've been on here, Canelo, Cody, whatever you want to call me. And then we're also joined again by Steve Webb, who's come on a couple weeks ago discussing some of the articles we wrote on the website. And now we're doing our kind of yearly segment now. It's my second year doing this with Steve. And this is kind of just the breakdown of each position. We got all the position players already posted on Dodgersbeat.com, and we're working on finishing up the starting rotation, bullpen, and the closer coming up over the weekend. So, but it's an exciting time. You know, we're getting really close to opening day. Opening day starts a little bit earlier for the Dodgers this year, as they are already in Korea as we speak right now. So, but Steve, I know before the show started, you know, we're getting really close to opening day. It's a really exciting time to be a Dodger fan, and kind of just doing these previews, it kind of gives you an idea of what the roster is going to be and then what you're expecting.
Exactly. Well, I'm trying to expect whether or not I'm going to be up at 3:00 in the morning to watch the opening day, but I'm going to try. I gotta get to bed early the night before, and maybe I can make it.
Yeah, 3 a.m. your time, 6 a.m. my time, so it's a bit of a morning game for both of us. So it'll be a little bit of adjustment, but I'm definitely going to try to tune in when I can. But yeah, it's really exciting. And that's the thing about these position previews is that I feel like last year there was a lot more to talk about just because there was so many different competitions between position players. You know, we had second base, we had outfield spots. This year, it kind of seems like the position group was pretty much set in stone right after Ohtani signed, where we knew pretty much the 1 through 9 each day. We had a really good idea of who they were going to be, which made it a lot easier for both of us picking out who they were going to put out there on a daily basis. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, of course, we had one gigantic little swap in the middle of the infield, but other than that, it was right field, left field are going to be kind of interesting this year. And we'll get into that more as we go by each position. But it is. I think basically, I have a pretty good feeling of what kind of lineup they're going to trot out there each night. I mean, lefty righty will have a lot to do with it too. So I think everybody's going to get their starts. But I'm not sure if there's. I don't know. Do you feel like there's a lot of competition for those last couple roster spots, or have you kind of locked them in your head already?
I would think a lot of people on social media would think that Gavin Lux's spot on the roster isn't guaranteed. But everything I've seen, it seems like he's
on the roster for sure.
He's going to be on there. But it's really tight when you get down to it, because even when I'm imagining the 26-man roster when they even come back to the U.S., you know, guys like Miguel Vargas are probably going to be starting the year in AAA, unfortunately, just because he just doesn't have the talent to crack this roster this year. In terms of how, like, the way I've been looking at it, the entire, starting rotation and the bullpen, that was the area of competition. Who was going to close out the last 2 spots in the rotation, and then who was going to fill up the bullpen, because Dodgers had a lot of pitching depth this year. Last year, it was extremely thin. They had to go pretty much all the way to AA and bringing up some arms to help eat some innings in the MLB level. This year, it's like a complete 180 to that, and especially when I'm looking at the roster, I'm looking at the 40-man. it looked like there was a lot more arms that were trying to, compete that way.
And there's a lot of, big league talent with non-roster invites this year too.
Yeah, I mean, another one that
on the
was
pitching side.
Yeah, another one that was interesting to me, and I was really interested with that he signed here was Justin Wilson, and he ended up,
Right, yeah,
he ended up opting out of his contract because it seemed like he just didn't have a spot. So, but yeah, I think there was more competition with pitching, but for the position players, I just really once January, February hit, I kind of had an idea of like, all right, I know he's going to be in the outfield. I know he's going to be in the infield. And then I already have an idea of, especially after Kike Hernandez signed back, I had a very good idea of what the bench was going to look like as well. So I would say it's been set in stone for a while. And like I said, the bench spots, they're going to come, it's extremely thin for some guys, and they're going to get optioned, unfortunately. And Vargas, like I said, just seems like the odd man out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think when we got Hernandez instead of Margot, it kind of made a lot fewer spots available just because of Hernandez's flexibility. If you stuck with Margot, then you might need another person like a Vargas to be available to play infield. But now that they've got Hernandez, I mean, they've got basically two of the same guy with Hernandez and Taylor.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Yeah. I mean, just getting into it, we'll kind of go in order from when we wrote the articles originally, going back to our first one. And that's leading off with you, the catching position for the Dodgers. Right. It seems like that's been a position of strength. So I'm kind of interested to see what the general ideas of what your article kind of went over, highlighting the Dodgers catching position this year.
For sure. Yeah. And to let everybody know that we're saving the pitching for another broadcast. So if you're here to get all the details about Tyler Glasnow, you're going to have to wait on that a little bit. Anyway, we're starting with catcher, the 2 spot in the on the diamond, and of course, I think everybody's pretty clear that, I mean, not even pretty clear, absolutely clear that Will Smith is going to catch the vast majority of the games. Now, I felt like Smith has sort of been on a little bit of a slight downward trajectory the last few years. And, because in 2021, when he first came up, he was, a lot more solid than it seemed like, or maybe at 22. Let's see, because he had an 860 OPS in 2021. And then in 22, it was 807. And then last year, 797. So, there's been a little drop off, and I feel like he hasn't been quite as clutch as I was used to seeing him in the early part of his career. Maybe pitchers are figuring him out a little better, but I'm not sure what to expect from Will Smith. If you go to our articles, there's both Cody and I talk about the Fangraphs projections for the year, and basically Fangraphs has Smith essentially doing a carbon copy of last year. They have him at 258. 353 on base, and slug. They expect him to go up just a little bit at 547. So that would get him up over 800 OPS again. And they're projecting he catches 130 games. The interesting thing about Smith, and it's kind of been a drag the last 2 years for him, is because we like to have that bat in the lineup, but when he's needs a break from catching, there's just no place to put him anymore. Like we had JD last year, and now this year we have Shohei, who's going to be, he's the DH period. So there's really no place to get Will Smith back into the lineup after if he needs a break. So if they say he's going to catch 130 games, that means there's going to be 32 games where he's going to be just maybe a pinch hit at the end of a game or something. He's not going to be a regular contributor. So that's an issue. And I mean, of course, and I don't know how you feel, Cody, about. I mean, we have Austin Barnes, absolutely, but I mean, I think there. I feel if you're Austin Barnes, you're feeling some footsteps.
Yeah, I think Austin Barnes' spot on this roster, no matter how many fans dislike him and his offensive production, is kind of just safe because, even Roger and I have kind of been having conversation off the scenes. It seems like he still catches a good game. It seems like a lot of pitchers still prefer him
Agreed.
behind the plate. I think Yamamoto, every single start he made in the spring, Austin Barnes was that catcher. But, at the end of the day, you're obviously going to go with Will Smith, especially in October, because you want that offensive production. I'm hoping Barnes can kind of have a little bit of a comeback season, kind of go back to that 2017-esque. I'm not even asking for all that. I'm asking for maybe a little bit of like a 230 hitter at this point in his career. But he's just a defensive first catcher. But both of them seem to still struggle with throwing runners out. And
Yeah,
I don't know if that's more.
That's the huge issue that the Dodgers are facing is it the pitching staff, though? That's the thing.
Yeah.
I sometimes I feel like some of these pitchers that are just not holding guys on at all, and it's very tough. I mean, Fangraphs has Barnes at 37 games and hitting 218 this year, which is a little better than last year. Last year he was at a $180. So if we get 218 out of my son, I think probably we would take that.
Yeah. Do you expect any of the younger prospect catchers to make their debut at all this season? We've seen rushing so far this spring. Cartaya is a guy who didn't make an appearance this year in the Cactus League, but he's obviously still up there in terms of the Dodgers rankings. Do you expect, or even Fiducia, who is also the oldest of that group, is on the 40-man roster.
And he's in Korea.
Yeah. So bearing any injuries or any possible extreme decline for one of the other catchers, do you anticipate one of these guys making their call up this year?
I feel like certainly Fiducia, I have a feeling, is going to be catching a game or two. If somebody's dinged up or needs a day off. But the other two guys, I feel like, as far as Dalton Rushing is concerned, I was really impressed with what he did when he came out and joined the team. But he's still a very raw talent. I think he's really kind of zoomed up the chart as far as being on the Dodgers prospect ranking. I think he's even ahead of Cartaya now. So we'll see if Cartaya is a guy I'd like to see catch as much as possible, and I don't think he's going to do anybody any good sitting on the bench in Los Angeles. I'd rather see him starting every night in Oklahoma City, and for whatever they call their team now.
Yeah, I definitely
Oklahoma
agree.
City Baseball Club.
Yeah, I definitely think Fiducia is definitely the more logical choice. Like you mentioned, he is in Korea. But in terms of the catching position this year, obviously you got it. You hit it right on the head. Obviously, Will Smith and Austin Barnes are going to be the primary two catchers of the Dodgers. But Will Smith is coming up close to being a free agent, and they already reported this year there's been no sort of extension talk. So the Dodgers could be looking at one of these younger catchers kind of taking over soon, especially with all the money that they have loaded up with all the contracts they signed this offseason.
Yeah, it's a good question whether or not they want to pay Will Smith. Because they are so rich at that position. And this is even after trading Keibert Ruiz for Max Scherzer a couple of years ago, right? And he was supposed to be the heir apparent, and even without him, you still have Cartaya, you still have Rushing, and Smith. So, boy, if I were Andrew Friedman, I really like Will Smith. He's a great face for the Dodgers, but I just wonder if they're going to say, let's give one of these young guys a try and let Will Smith get his paycheck someplace else.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be a question coming up soon in the next year or two for the Dodgers. But kind of going over to a position that doesn't have as many question marks is first base, which
like zero.
I mean, ever since once they signed him for the 2022 season to that deal, stealing him from the Atlanta Braves, I mean, what can you expect from Freddie Freeman? You know, he is just one of the most consistent hitters, not just on the Dodgers, but in all of baseball. And I mentioned in my article, it just seems like the older he gets, the more dominant he gets. It seems like he's like a fine wine, only gets better with age. And I think just looking at last year, the season that he put up, you know, Mookie Betts obviously was that flashy presence in the Dodgers lineup, but I argue that Freddie Freeman was the most valuable hitter on the club last year, just from April to, you know, I know he had a bad September and October, but from April to September collectively, he had a really good year. So, what are your takes on Freddie Freeman?
Well, Freddie, I think, is a guy who really needs to be seen regularly to be appreciated. I think the average baseball fan really undervalues Freddie Freeman because there's not flash, there's not attitude, there's just sort of, you know, workman-like brilliance, and so, you know, I'm sure in Atlanta they know Freeman, and now in LA we've seen, you know, kind of vintage Freeman. I think this is the best version of Freddie Freeman we're getting here. You know, he won the MVP with Atlanta, but that was a short season, but I think you could argue that his 2 years in LA have been better than any 2 years you want to choose out of the Atlanta pocket. So,
yeah, I mean, just looking at last year, you know, he finished top 3 in the MVP, obviously behind Betts and Acuna, but he hit 331 with 29 home runs, 102 RBIs, 161 OPS plus, and then he also hit an absurd 59 doubles, where if it weren't for that slow September where it seems like him and Betts were struggling to get hits, he could have broken that all-time double record. But, you know, I agree with you. I think unless you watch Freddie Freeman every day, you won't truly appreciate everything because he's not the flashiest player, but he's just a smart player. And even for a guy like his size, the thing that impresses me the most is just his base running. And the fact that he led the Dodgers in stolen bases last year, I believe with 23, is just kind of funny in my mind. Just because you wouldn't imagine Freddie Freeman, you know, being that speed threat for the Dodgers. But if you look at a lot of the doubles that he hit last year, a lot of them were just because he legged them right out of the box and chose good hits to go for 2 bags on. And I think that's just
he
a
knows
credit
the
of
field. He knows
good baseball.
He knows who he is, and he knows how to leverage every ounce of talent he has.
Yeah, so I definitely think there's not much else to really talk about with Freeman. You know, Fangraphs is projecting a lot of the same. You know, they're projecting to hit a good slash line of 300, 388, and then 506 with a 141 weighted run required plus. And it's definitely, I feel like he's in the prime of his career where we're going to see a Freddie regression eventually. I just don't think 2024 is going to be the year. We may see some slight declines in some categories, but I think the Dodgers trio, what they got up there, all 3 of these guys are in their prime. They're all going to be playing well. In terms of anything comes up, say if Freddie Freeman, for whatever reason, gets injured, the Dodgers still have logical options to go there. You know, Max Muncy automatically pops to the top of my head. He played first base for the Dodgers before Freeman got there. We've seen Kike Hernandez have some spot starts there as well. But the Dodgers, they win when Freeman is on the field for the 155 plus games that he plays for them. So I think that's definitely where they need to go for a successful 2024 campaign with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, the next stop, I think we should probably take together as I wrote a second base article and I wrote all about Mookie Betts. And then I wrote a shortstop article and I wrote all about Gavin Lux. And now we have to I have to put a little addendum to those two articles because in the time since I posted both of them, we've had I guess would be the equivalent of the atomic bomb of spring training was the decision to move Betts to short because of defensive deficiencies with Gavin Lux in the early going at spring training. Personally, I felt like it was kind of a quick hook. I don't know how I'm sure you guys have talked about it on the podcast before, but boy, for a guy who's coming off an injury that kind of put him on the shelf, to give him, I think I looked at his spring training stat, and he had like 30 innings at short. 30 innings is 3 games. That's an awful quick decision on management's part. Maybe he was just looking that bad on the practice field or in the inter squads and stuff. But boy, Plaschke had a big article in the LA Times. I don't know if you saw that Plaschke article, but he was saying, why are you putting this pressure on your best player? Playing shortstop is a whole different animal, and putting a guy like Mookie Betts, who let's be honest, right and second base are not the premier defensive spots. I mean, Mookie's great at them, but you don't put your best infielder at second. You don't put your best outfielder at right. Usually, you're up the middle with your best fielders. So
yeah.
So putting Mookie at short, I don't know. I mean, maybe they know what they're doing, and maybe the Lux situation had gotten that bad. But boy, I would have liked to have Lux given the opportunity to sort of feel his way around that position a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone that's kind of watched this show, kind of should already have my thoughts on the whole Lux situation, where I'm a Lux truther. I was glad that they gave him an opportunity last year, and I was even more fortunate for him to get an opportunity again this year after everything that happened last season. I do agree with you. I think it was a little bit premature to pull the hook. And I don't know if that's more of like what you alluded to, where he only is really 30 innings at short. I get that the fielding percentage was like around 700, which is way below league average, but you're talking about a guy that's that's fielding the premier elite defensive position in shortstop, who had a significant knee injury with his ACL and his MCL and a hamstring to boat with it. And he's kind of just getting the rust off. Like, I get that he was working out all off season, but he was also rehabbing all off season. He didn't just start taking off the knee brace until almost a couple of weeks before camp broke. So I would have probably wrote it out a little bit into the regular season, kind of seeing where you would go from there, where he's playing full, 7 to 9 inning games every single day. But maybe the Dodgers are just feeling a little bit extra pressure, where this season they really, I guess to their minds, they don't feel like they have a thing to miss. Like, they can't miss a beat at all because every single game counts, or they want to get in a rhythm now with Mookie Betts. But I read the Plaschke article. I kind of do agree with it. I know Mookie Betts is going to say yes. Like, I'm grateful for the opportunity. I'm going to do anything I can to win. Basically everything you want to hear an MVP player say. But it is a different animal for him, and he was preparing all off season to be a second baseman, and now you have to shift it a little bit over to be a shortstop, which just personally for me playing or even seeing other guys play, it's a different animal at shortstop. And even in the games he played there last year, he graded out pretty poorly as a shortstop. He graded out above average, slightly at average or above average as a second baseman. And his fielding has kind of been going down in right field for the past 2 or 3 years, just because of whether it's that hip injury that's still bothering him or just overall getting older. So at shortstop, that's going to be a big animal for Betts. And I think it may It could cause some issues, but he is an MVP player, so he could overcome those issues. But it's definitely going to be the first big storyline to watch.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but I could see a situation where maybe they don't get the production out of one of their outfielders that they're hoping, and Mookie heads back to right, and Lux stays at second, and they put Rojas in. I mean, because it's not like we don't have a fantastic shortstop. I mean, Miguel Rojas is elite. So, so I think that's the decision they're going to have to. I wouldn't care for Lux to be benched because I don't think that serves anybody. But I could see Rojas coming in and doing a little bit more duty until they get this thing sorted out. Because I cannot see Mookie Betts at 150 games at shortstop. It just doesn't.
Yeah,
just doesn't compute.
That's the one thing I don't understand. I thought originally if Lux was going to lose the job, they were just going to give it to Rojas again, just because if defense is your issue, just throw out arguably the best defender on the team in Rojas, put him at short, ride that out until Lux can figure it out. Because I think a lot of this stuff, just personally, I think it's just mental for him. Because I feel like physically he's out there able to do the work. It's just mentally he is not there yet. And you never know when he will be there just because of the injury. So I would have went with Rojas just right off the bat. I would have kept Mookie Betts at second because I also agree with you. Mookie Betts playing second is really dependent on Jason Hayward being a good right fielder again in 2024. And we've seen, some of, besides last year, with Hayward, we've seen his past couple years when he was with the Cubs. So that's a big question mark right there. But yeah, Betts playing second is contingent on all of that happening, where if they're not getting the production that they need in the outfield, Betts may have to break out his outfield mid again and go back out there.
Right, especially if you look at now. I mean, there are the two wild cards of Hernandez and Taylor. These two guys also probably will get their share of infield work, but I think if the outfield does not produce, I mean, this is arguably on paper anyway one of the least productive looking outfields that the Dodgers have put on the field in a while, right? I mean, they have potential all over, but there's not like one guy who's like, that guy's a stud. There may be studs in training or something like that, but I don't know if these guys are going to be giving the Dodgers the pop that they're going to need. Now, of course, when you have Betts and Freeman and Smith and that other guy Ohtani in the top four spots of the lineup, the bottom five don't have to do a whole lot. So whether it's Hernandez or Taylor or Rojas, I can see these guys getting some work in the infield as well.
Yeah. I definitely think this whole second base shortstop debacle is going to be a storyline that follows the Dodgers for at least the first month in April, because I like you mentioned, I'm also not in the boat with saying I think Mookie Betts is going to play 150 games at short this year. I think at one point, if Lux isn't working out, they're going to have to make a decision whether it is to put Rojas there or it's to trade for a shortstop that's on the market, which there's very few that are out there that are floating around. I know people have already spat out the Willy Adames trade rumors. I know everyone's looking
been bouncing around for a year. Yeah, people have been talking Willy Adames, but I don't know. Well, maybe with the Devin Williams injury, the Milwaukee rethinks their expectations for this year. We'll see how
I definitely think it's going to be all options that the Dodgers are going to be seeing, but I'm hoping that Lux just figures it out and then can eventually make his way back to the starting shortstop role.
Yeah, that's been my hope. I mean, I'm with you. I'm a big Gavin Lux fan. I like a lot about his game, and now we just need to get him back to where we can feel confident in his defense.
Yeah, and then kind of moving on to kind of close out the infield here, we're going to third base, which it's going to be solidified by Max Muncy, which him and Lux were both in the news cycle just for the reason, I guess, that the Dodgers made this change at short is just because the left side of the Dodgers infield defensively is not something that is too kind to your eyes. But Muncy is going to make up for it with his offense, kind of looking at where the Dodgers have a third base option. They signed him to that extension. He's more than likely going to be the third baseman for the next 2 years at least. Are you okay with the production with Muncy? I know there's a couple storylines with him where, he came into potentially in camp in the best shape of his life, I guess, and has been swinging the bat really well. What are your thoughts on Muncy playing third base again?
I'm okay with it. I think, Muncy as a fielder was a much better first baseman than he is a third baseman, but he started with the Dodgers as a third baseman, and after that Justin Turner injury in spring training a few years ago, right? So I think he can handle the position. I think he's committed to being better at it. So I'm not real worried about Max Muncy. I think you're just going to get. I feel like this is sort of a real good bounce back candidate. I could see Max Muncy, hitting 40 home runs this year, driving in 110, because he's got a lot. He's going to have a lot of traffic ahead of him, I assume, from the guys earlier in the lineup. So it's a lot of RBI chances, I think, for Max. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he has one of the best years of his career. That's kind of what I'm hoping from him.
I definitely, because there's not many options that are behind Muncy, unless you're looking at Kike Hernandez, who had a lot of starts there in the second half, or Chris Taylor, who's gotten some reps there as well. But I think in my article that I posted, I kind of went through kind of like the storyline of what Max Muncy has been going through the past 2.5 years. After that injury he suffered on the final day of the season, it's kind of been an uphill battle for him to become that 2019-esque version of himself, which was arguably his best career year until 2021. But I think 2022 was kind of a wash just because he was coming off of that injury. He had a really bad first half, had a slightly better second half. He made some adjustments. 2023 was really the first year that he entered camp and all offseason being healthy. And I think we saw the offensive production get a little bit better because he had career highs, I believe, in home runs and RBIs. And he's a guy that can still get on base with his eyes. He has a really good eye, draws a lot of walks, and can hit a lot of home runs. And I think looking at this year, just because of the sure talent that's around him, he's going to be batting, either fourth or fifth in the Dodgers lineup. He's going to have another chance to set a career high in a lot of offensive categories, like you've been alluding to. Maybe he can hit 40 home runs this year. He's definitely probably going to get over 100 RBIs again for, I believe it would be like the third time in his career. And just other things that are about with Max Muncy is just, it makes the Dodgers lineup that much deeper to have this guy at third base. And I think with the offensive production, you kind of can forget about the defense, because I think he's an average fielder. He's never going to be a Nolan Arenado out there. He's going to get, if it's a routine grounder, he's going to get you that. If it's a little bit harder, maybe not. But if he makes an error, he led the Dodgers in errors last year. He could still hit 40 home runs, and he makes up for that right there. But when it comes down to it in October, you hope that he can clean it up. And I think Muncy can be a really good above average fielder. So far this spring, it hasn't really shown that much, but like you mentioned with Lux, he's only getting totally 3 or 4 games at the position right now. And it's really not something that you can judge until maybe the middle of the season defensively wise. But I think offensive, he's going to be fine. It's going to be the same Max Muncy we've seen the past couple years. I would like to see him get his batting average up a little bit. I'm still a little bit old school with that. But if he can hit 40 home runs, 100 RBIs, and then walk over 50, 60 times, then I'm fine with that.
Indeed. I think we're going to get a good year out of Max Muncy. I feel like he needed last year to sort of ramp up. after that injury, kind of put a damper on everything. And it took a while for, I think, him to be fully healed. So,
Yeah. So honestly, I'm fine with Max Muncy. And then now we're moving into the outfield, which it's a little bit different than years past. Cody Bellinger is no longer here. Mookie Betts is now in the infield. And left field, as I alluded to, has just been a revolving door for the Dodgers for the past, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years, where they haven't had a steady position player that's been staying out there to play every game. So we'll kick it off with left field. They made a couple big acquisitions. They brought back Kike Hernandez. They have Chris Taylor, but the big one is Teoscar Hernandez, who they took on a 1-year, I guess you could say, prove it deal with some deferrals thrown in there. Your thoughts on Teoscar Hernandez joining the Dodgers lineup after he had a kind of subpar year with the Seattle Mariners last year?
I've always liked Teoscar Hernandez. I think he's never going to be a great player. You'll never want him to be the best player on your team, but I think he's always the fourth best player on a lot of teams, and that's something. I think he's got decent glove. I think he's going to shore up the defense out there a little bit, and I don't know what we're going to get out of him offensively, but I mean, I think it's going to be a next man up kind of thing. If he's in a slump, then they go to the other Hernandez, or they go to Chris Taylor. It'll be interesting. I mean, Chris Taylor for me is sort of the wild card out there. I kind of have a feeling of what Kike is going to have more of a limited role this year, no matter where he happens to land defensively. And with Teoscar there and Hayward on the other side, when does Chris Taylor get his at-bats? And that'll be an interesting thing to kind of track as well. That's another storyline I'll be watching.
Yeah, I like the Teoscar Hernandez signing. I'm not going to look too much into his year with Seattle just because I've seen so many offensive first players kind of go there and play and then have bad years. And it seems like he's the next person that was a victim of T-Mobile Park, kind of being a very pitching friendly park. Mm-hmm. I'm more interested in what the Dodgers were interested all offseason. I recall him being the first major free agent that the Dodgers were interested in this year, where at the GM meetings, Juan Toribio from MLB.com kind of reported, say, yeah, I've heard Teoscar's name kind of thrown around the Dodgers. That's someone that they're very interested in. They were looking for a left-handed smasher to put in the lineup to kind of replace that production that they're going to be losing with JD Martinez. But with Hernandez, he can actually play in the outfield, and he actually does have a really solid outfield glove out there. He's played games in right. He may slot in there a couple games this season, but he's primarily going to be used in left. I'm looking at his slash line against lefties. He's got a slash line at 275, 329, and 555 with an OPS at 887 and an OPS plus at 119. This is a guy that can hit lefties. This is something the Dodgers have struggled with mightily pretty much since I've watched the team. So the fact that they can get that production that they're losing with JD Martinez and kind of shift it to an actual outfield position makes up for it. And I agree with you. He shouldn't be your best player. And that's what I think the Mariners were dependent on. They wanted him to be hit their top two players on there. Obviously, they got J-Rod, but they needed him to kind of be up there. Where on the Dodgers, this is their sixth or seventh batter in the lineup, and they don't really need to depend on much. It's just they gave him that 1-year deal. They said, hey, join the team. We'll give you that $23.5 million, defer 8.5 of it, and let you test free agency again next year. But we're hoping you rebound with us, and hopefully we can do a lot of damage with you here for just this one season. So I still think the revolving door is going to be continuing for the Dodgers, but I really like the addition of Hernandez, at least for 2024.
So you think maybe 100 starts out there? What's your guesstimate?
I think he's going to get a decent amount of games in left, just because predominantly the guys that they're going to going against will be right-handed pitchers. If it's a left-handed pitcher, you may see him shift to right when Jason Hayward sits, and then that's when you would get, Kike Hernandez or Chris Taylor out there because like you mentioned, you got to give them at bats. And Hernandez is a plus defender in the outfield. Like I said, he played right. He can play left. So you'll see a lot of platoon, especially with this outfield right now. There really isn't a guy you can point to, and maybe James Outman, maybe to start most of the time. But I think Teoscar Hernandez is, and in total, I think he'll play at least 145 to 150 games because he is an Ironman out there where I think the past like 4 full seasons, he has played over 145 games each season. And last year, I believe he played, I think, close to 160. So he's a guy that can hit both sides. He just hits lefties a little bit better.
Yeah. And I didn't track Kike that much in Boston, but I know when he was in LA, he was a plus defender pretty much in the infield and in the outfield. And I know he played a fair amount of center in Boston, but it'll be interesting to see what Kike can do defensively in the outfield this year.
Yeah, and then kind of, he's a little bit older, and that kind of like how you mentioned he's played center field primarily with Boston and shortstop. That kind of can pivot us to James Outman, who is in line to be the starting center fielder for year 2. Obviously, he had a really good rookie season last year. Came, I believe, top 3 in the Rookie of the Year voting.
Third,
And after a kind of rocky middle of the year, he kind of ended it with a solid season. Are you confident that Outman can be a solid everyday center fielder, or do you think they're going to start platooning him like they did with pretty much the rest of this outfield?
Am I confident? No. But am I hopeful? Yes. I was a real big fanboy of James Outman when he came up because he just sort of, that first couple of months was, it's like, where did this guy come from? He wasn't even that high on the prospect list, and especially given the almost zero production we got the year before from Bellinger, it was like, a breath of fresh air out there. The question, on the table is this going to be replicated in 2024? I hope he still does well. I think he had a real solid spring, so we'll see how it plays out. I think Roberts is thinking, I want him out there every day. I'm not convinced that he's the kind of guy you want to have up when you need a hit, because there's a lot of streakiness in him, and there's too much swing and miss.
Yeah.
So many strikeouts. It was just he had a lot to learn about plate discipline, a lot of chase. And I hope that he can clean that up going forward because, even if he can turn, 10% of those strikeouts into hits, you're looking at, a much more valuable player.
Yeah, I think I like Outman. It seems like he got a lot better and more comfortable in center field as the season went on. Obviously, I know that bloop to lead off, game 1 of the NLDS is probably going to replay in his head, and that's going to replay in a lot of fans' heads. But that isn't really what James Outman was defensively in center field.
Right, he was a much better fielder than that.
He was an above average, almost elite. He can take a step forward into that elite territory in center for this 2024 year. But it is the swing and miss. It is the strikeouts. It is the streakiness, which it seems like a lot of these Dodger hitters do struggle with, where they'll have extremely high highs and they could have very low peaks. So that'll be something I look for with James Outman. In terms of the other options, we've kind of already mentioned them. Chris Taylor's gotten reps out there in years past. Kike Hernandez has had reps out there. Anybody else you could see kind of taking the center field spot from the minors or on the team?
I'm not thinking that there's going to be a lot of minor leaguers playing center this year. I think probably, there's a couple of outfielders that I could see coming up. Andy Paez, I think, is probably going to get at least a cup of coffee this year. But as far as center field goes, I think it's going to be the guys they got right now. Outman probably gets, somewhere between 100 and 130 starts out there. Probably he's, Fangraphs has him at a once runs created plus at 108 as opposed to 118 last year. So they're guessing that it won't be quite the season he had last year. But again, if I think he can clean up that strikeouts, that 181 strikeouts, that's just not going to be acceptable from an outfielder.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
And then kind of switching to the final spot in the outfield, we've mentioned his name a few times. Obviously, we have the logical candidates as well, but Jason Hayward had a resurgence year last year in 2023. Dodgers took a chance on him with that league minimum deal at $750,000. Gave him a big league deal this year. Obviously, the relationship with him and Freddie was a big factor in that. Are you confident that Jason Hayward will continue to have his resurgence this year, or are you a little worried, as I've kind of alluded to that I am, that he may have a hard time replicating that success?
Yeah, I'm skeptical, to be honest. I think if anybody in the outfield is going to be somebody that's going to make us pull our hair out, it's going to be Jason Hayward, because he was. I mean, I want to believe. I like Jason Hayward. He's a really nice guy, and the story was a sweet story. But boy, I mean, there's a lot of low 200 batting averages, the long trail of those. So, this last year was the anomaly. It was not, it's not like, oh, Jason Hayward is back. I mean, Jason Hayward hasn't been around for 10 years. So there's a lot of history fighting against him repeating a good season. I'd like to see it, and maybe just in a platoon role against right-handers, we can make it work. But I would be pleasantly surprised if it does, but I'm not expecting it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I'm a little skeptical. When the Dodgers were so fast to re-sign him, I was kind of a little bit. I questioned the move at the time because I feel like if they waited, they probably could have got him for a lot cheaper than I believe the $9 million that he signed. It also just seems like it kind of right now, especially how we've seen some of these players perform in the spring, it kind of just seems like it's taking up a roster spot, especially if he doesn't perform, because then they're obligated to just keep him on their roster unless they are the Dodgers, if they just want to cut their ties with him. They can eat the money regardless. In terms of replacements, besides the guys that we've already mentioned, you hit the one name, Andy Paez. He is the guy that I think by season's end will probably be on the roster in some way or another, perhaps even starting right field. If
do you think it's more likely that he makes an extended run on the Dodgers or Miguel Vargas?
I have talked to Roger off air, and I think, especially after this spring, I just feel like once Paez gets a good going in AAA, gets a couple months under his belt, because he did have the labrum surgery last year. He only got to play I think 2 or 3 actual games in AAA last year. So they're going to want to see at least a good chunk of at-bats there. I think he personally already overtook Vargas. I think he's a better hitter than Vargas. I think he's a better defender than Vargas. And he can play a position in the outfield, which is really the only spots in the Dodgers, lineup that has an opening potentially. And that would be like right field, left field, and then maybe center. And Paez can play right field. I think they're going to try to keep Mookie Betts in the infield as much as possible. So if an opportunity arises in the outfield, I think Paez will definitely be one of the first options they think. If it's something that happens early in the season, Vargas is probably going to get the call. But I think maybe after July and kind of getting closer to that September call up, I think Paez will be the guy. And if he's hitting well, he would need to be on that postseason roster.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that. I think that kid's got a good future.
Yeah. And then kind of just closing it out, the biggest piece of the Dodgers year is DH, and
Yes, we're
two-way
keeping it to the
star.
last, so we
Yeah.
get the clicks all the way to the end.
Yeah, Shohei Ohtani, obviously the two-way superstar, two-time unanimous MVP. He's going to be the Dodgers' primary DH for the next several years. I think the most interesting question that I would kind of ask you, because we've seen it thrown around early in camp, we know this guy's going to hit. We know he's going to hit an elite level. He could have a pretty much historic season offensively now that he can 100% focus on hitting rather than trying to do both. But there have been talks that potentially playing outfield or first base in the future. And he mentioned that he carries both gloves on hand. Would you kind of think of the idea at the season's end or in the future, or are you just going to ride him out as the DH for the rest of his career?
Well, I don't know much about how he was as a defender in Japan. I'd like to. Is there a track record there, or did he mostly DH? I know he played some outfield, didn't he?
I believe he was right field.
Right.
I'm not sure how he graded out, but I believe he was a decent right fielder. I just thought it was interesting just because they also mentioned he had a first baseman as well, which I think in terms of longevity
he's going to push Freddie Freeman out of first base.
I think in longevity,
I think he could put that glove
future.
away.
Yeah, so, but it is an interesting comment, and Dave Roberts even mentioned prior to that, he did mention that there was an idea of putting him in the outfield at the end of the year, but I don't really see a situation with that arising, especially with his rehab process.
Right.
But it is an interesting thought, though.
Well, I mean, the whole thing about having a permanent DH is exactly what you're talking about. It just sort of hamstrings your lineup. It's like if like back when we had Justin Turner and a few guys swapping out. Will Smith played DH for a while. Max Muncy was DH. So you'd have this rotating system of DHs getting people off their feet. It seems like a better way to play baseball than to have one guy dedicated as I am the DH. I mean, this is one guy who I guess deserves that. That he gets, okay, you could be DH if you want to, but I don't know if deciding, in his 30s that all of a sudden you're going to be a fielder is the wisest thing to do either.
Yeah. But other than that, obviously, what type of season are you expecting with Ohtani? Because there is a little thought in the back of my head because, I am from the Philly area. So one of the guys that had a similar injury that came back pretty fast was Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper had his own Tommy John surgery.
Right.
When he came back in May, he struggled a little bit in terms of like slugging. And my good friend Jake, he gave me
signals, right?
He gave me a lot of good numbers on this. Like Harper in the first half, his slugging percentage was like extremely low, below his career average. And then kind of once he got more at bats and the months went on, and then he got to the dog days of summer, that's when he was getting up to that, 800 slugging number. But it was a grind for him. That was my worry before spring training games started with Ohtani in him. But now after seeing how he's performed in those games, I kind of put them to the back of my head. But it is something that's still there. Are you worried with any type of possibility that he may start off the year slow?
Start slow. Yeah, it certainly Fangraphs has him projected to have quite a drop off. They're projecting his batting average to be only 266 this year, which I think is I take the over
That's
on
low.
that. That's very low batting, and they have him at about a 910 or so OPS with a 141 weighted run, a 141 OPS plus, and they have him at only a 3.9 WAR this year, which would be quite a drop off because he was 6'6" WAR last year, just as an offensive player. And I mean, that doesn't count the WAR he got for pitching. So I don't know. I think there's also the deal of this guy has more eyeballs on him than anybody's ever had in baseball history. I think that might be a fair statement. Maybe McGuire and Sosa back in the day, but everybody all over the world is fascinated by Shohei Ohtani. And when you play in Anaheim, it's Anaheim. Come on, it's not Dodger Stadium. It's not the home of Vin Scully and baseball history. It's when you play in Anaheim, nobody pays that much attention, even if it's Ohtani or Trout. It's sort of like a vacation for baseball players down there. It's not. You don't feel like it's a real game down there, right? Yeah. And so I think it's a whole nother level of pressure that he's going to find himself under. And now that he's playing with the arguably one of the 2 or 3 premier franchises in baseball.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think all eyes are going to be on him. All eyes are going to be on the Dodgers. And I think after seeing some sentiment after he signed with us is that now he may be treated as the villain by a lot of fan bases. When they go on the road, he may get some boos, which that would be the first time in his career, probably.
Yeah,
playing with Anaheim when they're under 500, it's hard not to
to
cheer for them.
Yeah, I went to an Angels game in San Francisco, and the Ohtani came up late in the game for the Angels, and the Giants were ahead by like 4 runs, and there was like 2 guys on base, and they walked Ohtani like in the 7th inning, and the San Francisco fans booed their own team for walking Ohtani. But it might be Ohtani who gets the boos this year. Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to Ohtani. Obviously, if you're a Dodgers fan, you're extremely excited that he's on this team for the foreseeable future. But other than that, that's pretty much it for the position player aspect of everything right here. Steve and I already said earlier on the show, we're going to try to get another episode with both of us once we have all of the pitching articles officially out there. We still got about 1 or 2 left to get published on the site. They will be out this weekend. But other than that, it's honestly looking at all the positions that we've seen here. I think we know the Dodgers are going to be a really good team, but there are still some question marks. There are still some concerns. And I think you have to look at the seasons with more than just your fan eyes. You have to look at the roster with looking at the questions that they faced last year, which I think last year was more pitching wise they struggle with, and me and you can agree to that. But I definitely think it's going to be an interesting group of position players this season. They're probably all going to have really great years, hopefully.
Now, let me ask you this. We're getting close to the end here, but let me ask you, if you did not have a blue shirt on and were just a baseball fan, and you saw the Atlanta 9 players and the LA 9 players, which one would you take? Just taking the pitching out of it.
I think if I looked at both sides, I'm going to lean slightly with Atlanta. I think Atlanta has more of a balanced 1 through 9, but they have a lot of players last year that had like career years, and I'm not sure if they can replicate that for another year. But I have more faith in like some outfield positions like Michael Harris Jr., like out there in center. I think he is more of a dependable guy, even though he had an up and down year last year. And then, Matt Olson, I still think he's a really good first baseman. I think the biggest thing in that is Acuna still going to repeat what he did last year, especially now he's already having health issues again with his meniscus. So that could cause some concern. But I think right now it's slightly go with Atlanta.
Yeah, I think, if you went position by position, we might have to do that sometime. Maybe before the next Atlanta series, we'll go position by position and decide who we like best. But I would say probably it would be like 5-4 Atlanta, maybe.
Yeah, it's extremely close. I think you would, and even some of them you could probably say like a pool. Like Freddie Freeman's like a really good consistent hitter, but if you're a guy who likes seeing power and RBIs, you may slightly lean Matt Olson. It really just depends on what stats you really want to cherry pick. I think at the end of the day, to answer your question, both these rosters are extremely close in terms of offense and pitching and bullpen. So it'll be interesting for the National League, which I think is a lot more competitive than the American League. But yeah, if you have
Yeah,
anything
it
else
seems
you want
like
to close
the
out?
American League has about 3 or 4 powerhouse teams this year, and a lot of also rans that are kind of going to be around 83 to 93 wins, and I mean, this is not the topic of our topic, but I don't know if the Orioles repeat. I mean, they with such a 100-win season, especially with the division getting stronger. But so yeah, I think the class of baseball is the Dodgers and the Braves, and you put them in whatever order you want. They're not very far apart. Even if you put the Braves one, you'd have to give the Dodgers a lot of credit. And if you put the Dodgers number one, you have to say, well, I don't want to face that Braves lineup either.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting when the first series rolls around. Always good theater.
Yeah. Well, that'll about do it for this episode of the Bleed Los podcast. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit the notifications on. We're trying to get more episodes out. We got a live coming up on Wednesday to celebrate, Dodgers opening day in Seoul, Korea. So be sure to follow us on social media at either at the Bleed Los podcast or at Dodgersbeat. And then obviously this was a kind of like a writer special. Be sure to check out the website, guys. Dodgersbeat.com. We're trying to post content every day. We're going to be finishing up our player previews this upcoming weekend. And we just added a couple of writers. We're still interested in other people that are looking to join the podcast or the website itself. So be sure to just check us out, check out the work. And if you're interested, just go ahead and just try applying for us. But we're looking forward to a really good year, and we'll see you on the next one.
Very good. Go Dodgers.
This episode has been brought to you by Bet Online. The game starts here.